Most sports fans want a life in the game they love, but few actually make it happen. And to do it takes a lot of passion, persistence, discipline. And like most things in life, just when you think you have it all, adversity can come and change the plan without warning. Our guest today not only shares the qualities mentioned above to succeed, but is also taking an active role in helping others succeed. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Win, a show where we interview champions and trailblazers and ask questions to uncover and discover their championship traits for succeeding in sports, work, and life. Win is part of Grit, a pivotalmomentsmedia.com channel focused on breaking the stigma surrounding mental fitness in sports. Visit pivotalmomentsmedia.com for more episodes, content, and education on how we can tackle that challenge together. Our guest today has a Super Bowl ring with two Super Bowl rings with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a scouting assistant, served as a recruitment specialist with UPENN football, and is a graduate of Drexel University's top-level sports management program. She currently works for NBC Universal and is the founder and co-host of the Next Woman Up podcast, which highlights the journey of women in sports and the role that we all play in evolving that medium. Carly, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Happy to be here. Thank you, JB and Lee, for having me on.
No, it's our pleasure. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while for numerous reasons, but let me start with this. I love, and I mean love, what you've accomplished thus far in we'll call it a young career, right? Because you're really just getting going. And I also love that you're really a beacon for anyone looking to get into a sports career. So let's just start with the basics. Where did your passion come from in sports? How did it drive you to where you are today?
Sure. So my love of sports started at a really young age. I think like a lot of people in sports, you have that foundation. And for me, it really started when I started watching Giants games with my dad back when I was 8 years old. And I fell in love with the game of football. And from then on, it was just this snowball effect. I couldn't get enough of sports. And my dad was really the proponent behind like pushing me more into it. I mean, I'm an only child. I have no brothers or sisters. So when my dad found out that I like love football, I was so into it. He really like pushed me and was really like a driving force behind me getting more involved. And just as I got older, I realized that if I didn't work in sports, I wouldn't be happy, and that I really needed to pursue that passion in my everyday life into my career. So really in high school, I realized that, and I took that thought and, moved it into college and studied sports management. But for me, there are certain things about sports that is unlike any other industry, is unlike any other thing. And I think people who work in sports understand that. And that's why we keep coming back to it. Like we can't get away from it.
Right.
And that's how I feel about it. It's always going to be drawing us back in. And even sometimes in people's careers, they may fall away from it, but they always come back because there's that passion pulling them back in.
Totally agree. There's been times in my career that I'll just use the word strayed. I've strayed away from sports, maybe as a job. But you're right. You always come back to it because there's a camaraderie to it. And look, there's just something about a multitude of people being driven towards a common goal that you hope a company is going to have. But sports, you have to have. In fact, you won't survive without it.
Right. I agree. It is the true display of teamwork, I think. And then I think also in terms of like not just working in sports, but being a fan of sports, I always say there's nothing that brings people together like rooting for a team or a sporting event
or rips them apart.
Yes,
I'm an Eagles fan, and I had to swallow that intro with the Giants, so I'm going to let that happen.
Yes, so that is very true. But I've always been like a big proponent of like you always see that sports bring people together, and like bring positive things to think. I don't know. I guess I always think about when different events happen to cities, like sports will always be there
to bring
people together. Absolutely.
Right. It's a totally community. And like I think, and JB, if we want to cover anything on this show, I think it's people underestimate two things: what people are capable of, and then also how important community is, how purpose, community, identity. And sports teams will give you all of those. I mean, there's a great comedian who talks about, JB, I got to send you this clip, but he talks about like, you wouldn't go to your job and wear someone else's shirt with their name on it. Because, there's grown men and women that walk around with other people's names on their back, and that's literally the uniform they wear to work. Like nothing that would not be acceptable in any other way of life, right? So yeah, I agree with you
No,
100%.
no, it's great. And Carly, I love what you do. Carly, just so you know, I'm a 4-time military post flag football champion. Okay? Four-time. So
What position?
Well, it's a little bit different. Sometimes I played QB, sometimes I played slot receiver.
He's got a QB's face. Let's be honest. Yeah,
exactly.
I could see you with just that pose, buddy.
The flag.
Do they have the Spizo award? It's like the Heisman, but in the Army.
Right.
Yeah, they should, right? I can do it almost. Carly, I love the fact that you were in professional sports. I love what you said about sometimes it's timing that lands you perfectly. I ended up in the NHL and it was by luck, right? I didn't play professional hockey, and then somebody saw that I could do something to assist players, and that's how I ended up in professional sports. And so I love the fact that you were in an organization that that looks at different things. You were in the inside, that sometimes the good old boy system, they look one direction, but now people are getting a little smarter. They're like, how can this person help me? And so why don't you just talk us through, the timing and how you landed with the Bucks and walk us through that experience.
Sure, absolutely. So I know it's a cliche, but networking. I was working at University of Pennsylvania, doing recruiting for their football team. And I always knew I wanted to take it to the next level. My dream was always to work for an NFL organization. And I wanted to do it on the football side. I always knew that was where I wanted to eventually end up. And I just really put myself out there. I was talking to as many people as I could that I thought could help me. And through a series of events and getting in front of the right people and getting my name out to the right people, the Bucks found me, gave me a call, told me they wanted to fly me to Tampa for an interview soon after. This was like May of 2019. And they flew me down, and I arrived to Tampa, and I wasn't exactly sure what to expect for this interview. I knew I was going to be there for 2 days. It turns out it was a group interview. So we didn't know who our competition would be until we had to meet in the lobby of the hotel. And I get there. Yeah, I get there, and it was 4 men and myself, which to be expected. And didn't really faze me at that point. I was used to working for a football team, being surrounded by men and being the only woman in the room many, many times. So was just, another day in the office in that type of regard. But I think maybe they were a bit surprised to see me. And it was a 2-day interview where the idea was that they wanted us to work as a team, but in competition, which I thought was very interesting. And we had multiple assignments throughout the 2 days, but we had to leave as a group at the end of the day. So we had to kind of keep tabs on, how are you doing on this work? How are you doing? Can we go back to the hotel? Which was really interesting way of doing it. And basically we had to present some of our reports to the whole department. We had a bunch of reports that we had to write and some cut up tapes that we had to make. So they really put us through the ringer those 2 days. And fortunately, I, did a good job, and I got the job offer a couple of weeks later.
Wow.
And it was really a great moment for me and my parents, of course. So that's kind of how it worked out. But I mean, the one thing I can always stress is network. Like it's such a cliche, but it's so true.
It might be a cliche, but 2% of people do it effectively. And that's the key. When I speak to students, I tell them that it's who you know, and you got to talk to people. It's not, you're not owed anything. That's the kind of thing you got to break past. You're not owed anything. You got to make it happen for yourself. I also love that they did that kind of group team interview. And my guess is they just wanted to see how you work with other people, and are you a team player? And that's a brilliant way of doing that. Carly, when you're talking,
That's taken from the military, Lee. That's
all great teams.
yeah, because
yeah.
well, Tampa has a special operations base right there. And that type of technique is what they do in like special forces, advanced selection, that sort of thing. They put people together, make them work together, because they're also Carly, they're also testing you to see how you work in a team environment.
Yeah.
So
look, I've said it many times.
Carly, you were probably the choice, and they just seriously, you
might
were
not
probably
be wrong.
the choice, and they just probably put 4 dudes with you to see how you handled it, right? And you crushed it. So well done,
Carly. You might not be wrong with that.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Now she's gonna wonder that the rest of her life. Way to go, JB.
No. She was probably the choice.
JB, I agree with you. Look,
let's see how she handles this group.
I always say that the military is the best team on the planet. So it's not a surprise to me that sports teams are borrowing ideas. But look, Carly, you might have a point. What's cool about your story, and I love this, is that you said, they called you to go and fly. I felt my heart flutter when you said that. Like, that's so awesome. Even though I've been in those positions, it's like, it's so awesome. Like, I love hearing when anybody gets an opportunity and crushes it.
And the funny thing is, like, a funny tidbit, the DVP that called me for the Bucs, he has a 215 number, and that's a Philly number for Philly. I don't know. So I was like, I thought it was just like a random Philly call because I was living in Philly at the time.
Right.
So it was very unexpected.
Right. Well, and look, for those of you who don't know, we talked about timing. Now, getting this job at any time would have been amazing, but you happen to land there literally with Tom Brady as he entered into the Bucs. So, like, just walk us through as a football person, watching that organization for 2 years, not watching it, being in it, right? I mean, that was amazing what was accomplished there. So tell me about the 2 years of Brady and the whole team, because I'd love to know about, was there a culture change internally with whatever you can talk about? How professional was it? If that's a fair question, what did you experience when you were there?
Sure, absolutely. So I came in the 2019 season. So that was prior to Brady arriving. And, we wwas an okay team. Like, we were really trying to, we had some very talented guys. Obviously there was the QB question. And let's just say that when there were talks in the offseason about Brady arriving, I did not think it was going to happen. I think it was I thought it was like a long shot, all that. So when he did sign with us, there was obviously like within the organization and within my team, oh my God, like we did it. Like, we landed the GOAT. Like, we knew things were going to change for us. And he immediately instilled his culture. It's hard I feel like not to listen to the guy or not to follow the guy. He obviously has such a presence in the building. Everyone knows he's there. Everyone knows what he's about. And there was a culture shift. I think the vibe was that, wow, we are serious contenders now. Let's act like it. And then on top of that, it was the COVID year. Right. So not only were we thinking we're serious contenders, we need to act and play and from everyone in the organization to our potential, but we can't mess this up. We need to take this very seriously in terms of COVID. And that falls on every single person that went into that door. And I think that brought us even closer together as a team, because we could not mess this up. One, you don't want an outbreak amongst players. You could lose some people. Two, our head coach, was not in he's not in the best health, that kind of thing. Like, you really don't want to risk that. So there are a lot of things that were on our mind that weren't just, football focused. And I think we really all tuned in, knew what the assignment was. And yes, Brady did have an effect on that, but I think all the other players and everyone else in the organization, everyone on the football side stepped up, understood their role, understood what they needed to do and what we wanted to accomplish.
Right. Would it be fair to say, and I'm honestly asking this, like, I think anytime you get a player like Brady, and there's more than, he is the GOAT, but there's other players like that. I think what happens is, and this is what's amazing to me, I think the standard immediately goes up.
Yes.
But people have to raise themselves to the standard. And that's where the real magic happens, right?
Yes.
Like it's not enough just to get someone. And I love that you're kind of diving into that of, okay, we got this piece of the puzzle. And again, the thing I love about football the most is it's teams within teams within teams. You can have the best quarterback. That's not the solution. The solution is everyone's got to raise their standard to meet that. So
Yes.
Was that, and again, I'm not trying to cut into a question for later, JB, but was that, you felt that from leadership? Was it, or is it just a communal, hey, we're doing this, we're bonding together and we're doing this?
I would say it was communal. I think everyone understood what they needed to do.
Right.
I would say like the way our organization felt, and I really did appreciate the culture like this, especially, I would say, I worked with BA, but BA was not my, direct report. I came down, like all my assignments were down through the GM, Jason Light. And the way Jason operated is he's very he shows how confident he is in your ability, that he doesn't need to, tell you everything that you have to do. He understands that he hired the right people for the job and that we will carry out what needs to be done and we will take it seriously and we will rise to whatever the occasion might be.
Right. I think that's, great teams, great coaches. I hear this. We've interviewed other people before. You don't draft a player. You don't hire someone to baby them. That's do your job. Right. Yeah. And I love that you were in that position, and I love that you were with that team. I remember you telling me that on the phone, and I was like, you gotta be kidding. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And
that's fantastic.
I will say, I think the interesting thing is, and we really took, in terms of drafting players and the players we put in our locker room, we really took character seriously. And I think also in terms of hiring, like we took character seriously. Like now that I'm thinking about it, like I think there was a parallel, like all the people that are top and highest guys in the front office hired,
right?
They wanted good character. It's like we had our own locker room in a sense.
Yeah, actually, I want to dive into that before I go to the next question, because that's something we actually, JB and I discussed, my friends and I discussed, that talent is a big part of the equation, but it's who you are, and we've seen this more in drafts across sports. It's not just football, right? That the type of person you are really plays into this. And to the point too, that like the combine is becoming a dated concept. Like I'm not against the combine. We don't really need it anymore. Like we know this stuff. It's the internet age, right? Yeah. So can you give us an insider's perspective as a football person of how does that process start? 'Cause it's not just about asking, hey, are you a good person? Like how do you dive into that, or how does your group dive into that?
Yeah. So we have, I don't know how every other team functions. I'm assuming everyone has their own way of diving into this. We had a fairly in-depth interview process with these players, and anyone that we thought might come into the building, whether it be a draft eligible guy, whether it be an undrafted free agent, we made sure that we went through an interview with them. And we had some very specific questions that really we think showed particular aspects about the person themselves. And I think these questions like revealed a lot about the type of character. And they were some pretty serious questions. Like they were not easy to answer. They're not easy to ask, but it was necessary. And it really did reveal a lot about the guys we were talking to. And that was our process, and it did go a long way in the way we evaluated guys.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And again, JB, I'm assuming in the military there's versions of this too, because you have to be able to do the job, right?
Well, you have to be able to do it, and you talk about talent, grit, all of that. Obviously, you have to be talented, right? Because you can pick all the best people, but if you're not talented, you need some of that. I remember in hockey, our assistant GM, and he was a West Point grad, and he would colorfully say, he's like, we're looking of players of character, but we also have to understand they're not all choir boys either. And I think one advantage that you might have had, Carly, that we didn't have in NHL was, you were picking, you were looking at somebody that was several years older. We were drafting. We had the same things you did, the in-depth draft interview. We would give an assessment test, that sort of thing. But sometimes they're still boys. They're 17 and 18. Yeah. And some of these, the scouts would be like, that kid had a terrible interview. I'm like, he's 17. He doesn't even know what an interview is. Yeah. And they're like, oh yeah. Like, oh yeah. And so I would be that, like, the kid didn't have a great interview because the poor kid doesn't know how to be interviewed. And I think that's part of it. So you kind of have to look at that assessment. I'll let you speak on that, Carly. And the second part I'm going to ask you this question too, is culture is so important and it's so overlooked. And yes, you can win without culture. We know that. If you have the best players, you get a little bit lucky, you can win without culture, but you can't sustain it. So you need culture to sustain it. Go ahead, Carly.
Absolutely. So the first thing I will say is that I totally agree with you. Hockey is like a different animal. And I think roster development in hockey is so important. You got these guys at such a young age, and these are your like biggest investments. I'll say that in every sport. Your players are your investments. Your draft picks are your investments. You have to cultivate them. Otherwise, you're losing out on that investment.
100%.
I always think about it that way. And then second, I will say culture is so important. I think it goes back to that team dynamic, and having that like unified idea. If you don't have a culture, there's no direction, and you're not really having a unified vision. And I do think it comes from the top down, and everyone needs to buy into it in a sense.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, Carly, you saw it too. Everybody has to continue to remember that everybody's doing it for their own personal reason. Right. Everybody's doing it. Like a player might be doing it because, you know what, he grew up poor. He wants to set a standard for his family going forward. That's one thing. And everybody can have their own reasons why they do it. Brady came to Tampa. Who knows why? Maybe to stick it to Belichick, maybe to just show he could do it without him. No one knows. He's doing it
for a Super Bowl in warm weather.
Well, and maybe that too. But he's doing it for his own personal reason. But as long as you take that personal, selfish reason and put it in its place, and then let it combine with the organizational goal, then things move ahead. And you saw that firsthand.
Carly, there's a great story too about NASA when they were doing the moon landing, about John F. Kennedy going to a janitor and asking, hey, what do you do here? And he goes, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. Right. It's the identity and the focus and the purpose was so strong that even the janitor said, well, my work helps put somebody on the moon. And look, that was probably the greatest undertaking in human history, if you think about it. So that had to happen. And same thing in the military, JB, on a daily basis. You have got to be looking out for the person next to you, or you will fail, period. And failure in the military is a little different than failure on the football field. So I just think culture and identity are by far the most underlooked, as you said, and the most important things that there are. So Carly, look, there's another undertaking I want to talk to you about. Be remiss if we didn't. And that's just women in sport. And you, our producer, Caitlin, in my mind, are trailblazers in that regard. All right. And it's a very important mission that obviously JB and I stand with you with. But look, this is how we look at it. Women are earning prominent positions in sports, and it's often being met with jeers from people saying it's a diversity hire, it's a gimmick to some people, to just get people to show up. And the three of us know from experience, you do not get a job at the top level of sports for those reasons. They don't hire for those reasons. Honestly, it's too much on the line, number one. But number two is if you're getting to a professional level, you earned it. All right. How do we break the stigma of women being in a man's industry? And that's the good old boys that JB was referring to earlier. And how can we be an ally in moving forward with the fact that women belong in sports?
Definitely. And I'm really glad that you're hitting on this because it is obviously very personal. And I have heard it. Every woman I know that works in sports and I'm close with has heard it. And interestingly enough, for me, it has never come internally. The people that hired me, the coaching staffs that have been around me and seen my work, they have never doubted why I've been there. They have always given the biggest vote of confidence. They have never treated me differently for being a woman. The issue is the outsiders looking in, the fans, the media, all those type of people. And I think it's just a lack of education. Really, people just are not educated that women can do these roles and do these roles well. I think one of the biggest stigmas is, well, if she didn't play the game, how does she know what she's talking about?
Can't stand. I hate when they say that. Like they say that about everybody if they haven't played.
Right, anyone.
Every armchair football fan.
I flipped the table over at a scouting briefing.
Yeah,
because
you've been watching the game for 30 years. You think you know more, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that is something that, I mean, and they, right, like you said, it's not even women, men as well who haven't played the game. That is always a knock. And I think that is truly, people need to be educated on the fact that you don't need to play to know what's going on. You can clearly study your tape, study what you need to, and have that knowledge. I also think maybe, and this is something I'm a huge proponent for, is creating more opportunities for women to learn the game if they don't play. So, like scouting courses and coaching courses and making these more readily available. And maybe if there is that like awareness that women are involved in these things, that stigma of, well, they don't know what they're talking about will kind of come down. I do think we're never going to be able to completely get rid of it. I think there are ways to mitigate it. And I think it's through education, but, and making it visible. I think people need to see it more.
Right.
Because it's all about visibility. And that makes people more aware, which makes people less ignorant, et cetera. But
because people are afraid, Carly, that's why.
Yeah.
They're afraid. They're afraid of you because you are bright, you are intelligent, you do know more than this muckety muck over here, right? that maybe had a couple snaps in the game, right?
Right.
And that's what happens. They're afraid of it, and so because they don't want to go back and get educated and come back to it. And that's why you see people that leave the game. It's a little different in football because most of them do go to college, but in hockey as an example, we have a lot of players that leave the game that haven't taken one college class.
Yeah.
And a player's retired. He's like, what should I do? I'm like, go to college.
Yeah.
And he looked at me like, well, are you kidding me? I'm like, go to college.
Yeah.
You want to work here? Go to college, like meet people that you've never met before and done things. But that's the whole part of that. So go ahead, Carly. You're
Sure. No, that's a very interesting point that you make. And that's so true, especially, I mean, it does differ throughout sports. But you're right. A lot of these players, all they know is the game that they've been shown. And that's not necessarily the game as a whole. Right. If you play a certain position, maybe all you know is that position. Maybe that's all you've done your whole life. And that's all you understand. So you definitely need to kind of expand your views. That's like a very interesting point. So thank you for bringing that up, JB, because I did not consider that.
Another point I want to bring up as a man is just my own experience. I have no problem making myself vulnerable with this, is that, and this is not just with women in sport. This could be race. This could be anybody that's not like you. Right. And people have to get comfortable with this notion. You will never understand what it is to be in someone else's position, and that's okay. I think what gets people in trouble is, no, I understand the plight of women. No, I don't. I'm not a woman. All right. And like, I just, that's the hump I always feel like people have to get over. Right. And when I think about that in sport, I remember when I learned this, when I was a young coach in my early 20s, team building has always been very important to me. And I had a great professor at Drexel, Dr. Amy Giddings, who and I remember she was telling me, women bond easier than men in sports. And I remember my thought process immediately was, well, I want to know how to do that. It wasn't, well, they're women. It was, I don't care who it is. If they're doing something differently that I can learn from, that was my approach. Now, I've always been surrounded by strong women my entire life. So I grew up in that environment. The point I was going to make myself vulnerable is I grew up around such strong women that I was ignorant to the plight of women because of it. Right? I never had thought about that. In fact, I remember having a conversation with my wife, Carly, about during kind of the Me Too movement time period of like, hey, have you ever experienced this? And her, her answer was like, of course. I remember feeling like ashamed of myself. Like, how did I never think this? But the reason I'm bringing this up, and where I'm going with this, is that as men, you have to acknowledge, one, you will not understand, right? You never will, and that's okay. That's the first part. Number two is you're going to either be an ally or an hindrance to this. All right. This young woman we're interviewing knows her stuff. She knows more about football than I do. If I want to learn about football, I'm going to go to her. Right. I'm not going to go to the guy down the street that's been watching the Eagles for 20, 30 years because he loves the Eagles. Right? I'm going to go to her. All right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right. That's the stigma to me of would I ever sacrifice learning something new from a knowledgeable person or allow some stigma to get in the way of me doing that? That's the kind of battle that I want to stand next to you with, because I honestly, I can't fight it for you either, right? Women have to be in sports for that to happen. So anyway, I said a lot there. I'm not trying to get in a soapbox. I never understood that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate that. And I think what you brought up is like, you shouldn't let that stigma stop you.
Right.
Now I thought, oh, it's an ego thing too. Like, let's not forget there's ego wrapped up in this as well, which is a totally different story, and how you break down that. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't answer.
You're absolutely right, though. All right, ego ruins the world in a lot of ways, but
well, I just love the fact, that your organization looked at different things to do different. We look in hockey, and if you said you still say it, and they're like, you say analytics, and people like start having convulsions. And you look like analytics, just and you use them, Carly. They tell you a part of the story, but you get these scouting departments together, and they're like, and I would like have to calm people down and be like, he's just telling you a part of the story. Now you tell us a part of the story. What you see, what your eye sees about this kid that we want to draft. Analytics says this. What do you say? And let's find it. And that's what listen, if you can find a technique to give you an edge, then it's okay. Like all my questions, Carly, when I interviewed in 14 NHL combines, all my questions were EQ based questions. It was nothing about their, and the kids would look at me like, no, I'm not going to tell you, like, what power play do you prefer? They were all EQ based questions. Tell me what you learned about yourself in the past year that helps you prepare yourself for your day. They were like, well, right. And what happens is you get an insight into somebody, because as you know, and you've seen it, Carly, with the coaching staffs, like everybody's a different human.
Right. And
if you don't try to dive into that as a leader, you're never going to get the best out of them, right? Well, and never going to get her. And Lee, your favorite coach, Herb Brooks, like he hit a home run on it.
Listen, my love in sport, JB, different. Like with what I do, I love the challenge of so many different people with different motivations, different demotivations, different backgrounds coming together and accomplishing something together. That's why I always say it's like a little miracle every time it happens. That's the best that our species can offer. And I love that. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because we're living in a time where that's being ripped apart from people more than ever, outside the world wars, obviously. Right. And it's just, that's what I find amazing. And I don't care if it's men, women, race, experience level. If you're in it, you're in it. You're part of the team. You're part of the team. Sorry, Carly, we're going off on it. So we get passionate about this stuff.
Oh, this is great. I agree with you. It's awesome stuff.
One thing, just a quick follow-up, JB, and then I'll throw it back to you. I'd be remiss if I didn't answer this. Look, you're a trailblazer. I think your father was a trailblazer too. We talked about timing, right? He could have easily said, that's a man's sport. You don't need to know about that. He didn't. He looked at you and said, you love this game? I'm going to teach you this game. That man's a trailblazer. The timing was right for that to happen, right? We're in an era now. I think the Chicago Blackhawks just promoted a woman to assistant GM. We're seeing it in baseball. We're seeing it more. these are glass ceilings coming down. And I said it before, we have a lot of work to do. But for the young women watching, now they see you. They see these GMs. They see someone doing it. What I have to ask is, what's your message to them, right? You're there. Where do you want them to go?
Sure. So there's something that I have always said to myself since I was a kid and I had a dream of working in sports, and people would say to me, super competitive, you can't do that. And this is something that I will say to all the women out there who want to accomplish things in sports, outside of sports. Someone's got to get the job. Why can't it be you?
Right.
And that is something I have said to myself over and over and over again, because it is the truth. Why can't it be me? What disqualifies me? Like, not, and a lot of the times it's nothing. So I think continuing to play that message in your head that this job is open, why can't it be yours?
Right.
And something I will say, and I love that women are breaking all these barriers now and shattering these glass ceilings, because I'm only 26, but even when I was a kid, I didn't have these women to look to. There wasn't anyone.
Right.
So the fact that we at least do have, like, there is a long way to go, but we have several women across all the major sports that are doing these things. It's so, so great. Right. And I hope that young girls now see us and really think that they can do it. That was something that, got me out of bed every day to go to work, was that one of the things, was that I hope one little girl, even if one was just one, right, saw me, that she went, oh my God, this girl, Carly, she's doing it. I know I can.
And I guarantee you that has happened and will continue to happen. I hope to God the show provides that to somebody. The last thing I want to say, and this is, I got to actually preface this. What I'm about to say is perspective based. It is not politically based. It is not anything but perspective. But I think a lot of times, especially for men, we forget very easily. And again, perspective. If you're a white man, you've seen a white man do everything in the world. You've seen him do everything. President, sports, land on the moon. It's the norm for us. We've seen it. I remember the first time I put myself in a perspective of, what if I had never seen someone that looks like me do something, right? It almost is impossible or unbelievable. That's where the word trailblazer comes in. Again, from presidents to vice presidents to women in sport. If you've never seen it, it changes things. We had a great interview, JB, where we talked about Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. And the thing that no one talks about is the next person to break that record happened just, I think, weeks or months later, because they saw it. So when we're just bringing this back to women in sport, that's the trailblazing nature. We're seeing glass ceilings being broken. And I'll be honest with you, if you can do the job, you can do the job. It's that simple. So anyway, I wanted to make that point. I always like to try and share my perspectives. I think it helps people learn. But like, you have to get your mind there. You got to realize, like, oh, okay, a female GM in hockey. No one has ever seen that before.
It's
coming. You can make fun of it. It's coming. You're right.
It's coming.
African-American GM in hockey. It's coming. Right?
It's coming. Kevin Weeks, baby. Kevin Weeks. Yeah, Let's go, Kevin.
We're big proponents of that. But like I said, it's never, I'm just trying to give some perspective to listeners that maybe have never thought about that. And again, for you, again, one more side question, JB, I promise. But there must have been some women glass ceiling breakers for you that you saw them do that made you think or assisted you in thinking of, I can do that. Someone's got to get that job. But like, who were your heroes growing up?
So I will say that, I think I looked outside of sport a lot, because that was what was available. So there are just, like, I also have plenty of strong women in my life that have always, I wouldn't put their career as a priority as long with everything else that goes on in life. And that was always an inspiration to me. And then when I got a bit older and, there were more women breaking in, I will say this, and this is just crazy that I ended up working alongside of them. I remember when I saw the report that the Buccaneers had hired, well, let's start with the Cardinals hiring Jen Welter. Like, that was like a huge thing for everyone, and we were, and like for women in sport and women in football and women who love football, like that was just like an amazing piece. And then there are other women that came after her. And then when the Buccaneers hired both Coach Lowe and Coach MJ,
Right.
and I remember reading that report and I was like so excited. And then the fact that I ended up working alongside of them on the same
Right.
staff as them was just like even more incredible. So like I said, growing up, I looked outside of sport and a lot of the time because it just didn't exist that much. So I, did find inspiration and just strong women across the board. And then in terms of, when I got a bit older and things were starting to happen, those are some of the women that I was like, wow, that's incredible. And like,
Right.
that is amazing. They're accomplishing that.
Well, you're one of them now too. I mean that.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Love
JB.
it. No, I love it. Carly, so let's talk about a little bit, obviously you have this leadership focus too. You lead by example. You're smart, you're educated, you put yourself forward. You're like, hey, why can't I do this? I love that attitude. But now that you're going to move to a phase in your life, and you are now where you are a leader. What leadership attributes do you feel work for you, and what character traits do you think others should have if they're listening to this and they want to follow you?
Sure. So I'm a very vocal leader. I like to talk a lot. And I'm like very like communication is my thing. Like I'm
Well, you work great with these two guys right here.
I'm super communicative. And I think that is so key. I think being a leader, you need to explain your expectations. I think that is so important for people that you're leading to understand like what you expect of them and what like they can provide. I'm a very like type of, if you need me, I'm here. Like it's actually interesting. We'll get there at some point, but for our podcast, we recently hired an intern, and I've had interns before, but it wasn't my company.
Right.
So like this is a totally different situation. But I'm very much like here if you need me, but I want you to cultivate your own ideas, to develop your own ideas. And I've taken some leadership things from the really great bosses that I've had and throughout my career, and the leaders that I've had throughout my career and how they have led me. And I think really just saying you and expressing to that person, you're here for a reason. I want you to run with it. I want you to understand what you can provide to me just as much as I am providing things to you. I don't ever want it to feel like one-sided, that because I am the leader, that someone else's opinion is not valid or someone else's role is not as important as mine. I think that is super like very significant to stress. And something else I will say is, as much, and I will say in the sports world, like things are intense. You can't take things personally, all those things. And this is something that I'm working on: compassion and understanding for the people that you lead. That is huge. And that is something that does not come naturally to me. So that is something I'm working on. I think that is super important and maybe overlooked at times.
That emotional quotient, Carly, your IQ can be high, but if your EQ is low, you're going to be struggling. Your IQ can even be a little bit down, but if your EQ is up, then you will survive as a leader and you will succeed as a leader. You're exactly right. And you talked about that EQ can be learned, right? You can learn that. Lee has an advantage of it. He's older than you. I'm older than both of you. And you gain some of this through experience though.
Right.
I look at myself as when I was a 20-year-old sergeant to now, like you learn these things, you take things in perspective. Carly, that was great. I love it. And you should write a book. So,
I want to say it too, JB, just kind of support what you said. Yeah. The world's changing too. Where like that, the ability to have empathy, like we all need to really learn that. And Carly, I'm a lot like you. In my younger years, I was very demanding, and I didn't share a lot of. I really cared. I cared deeply about my players and my staff, but I had a hard time sharing that. And as I got older, I really, like you said, you had to learn it. I think, JB, the key to what you said, and I think this is the key across any great person in sports, is you got to just continually be learning. My quote is always that good coaches know everything. Great coaches know they know nothing. Right? You have to continually be willing to, I wouldn't say reinvent yourself, but learn and change, because the players are changing every year. I mean, and Carly, you could probably talk this a little bit too, but young athletes coming into professional sports today are extremely different than young athletes just 10 years ago.
Especially with the NIL now.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they're making cash coming into the show.
Right.
So,
Right. With NCAA athletes.
yeah.
So it's just one of those things, especially for everybody listening. If you're a young coach, you need to lean in on this stuff. You need to really learn about this stuff and what makes people tick and why they are how they are. And another thing, Carly, again, just listen to you. One of the things I love about your leadership style is you're clearly a servant leader. I want the people that work with me, I never say under me, to feel comfortable. Like we're part of a team. We all have a role. In fact, I've said this before. At my company, we don't even have job titles unless you need one. Like there's occasions where you need one, right? But it's not about that here. It's not about that, And when people leave, I say put whatever on your resume you need to look good. But you were part of a great team. Carly, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about two things, both the Next Woman Up podcast and just kind of where you're going right now with what you're doing in your life and where you want things to move forward.
Sure, absolutely. So Next Woman Up podcast, we're pretty young. We're a little over a year. And my co-host and I went to high school together. We were like always talking sports between the two of us. She went on to spend some time working with the NBA. Her expertise is communications and PR. And, I handle the football side of the house and I talk hockey and baseball as well. And we really wanted to create the podcast because I listen to a lot of sports podcasts. They're strictly sports and they're very, very male focused. And all their guests are men. It's very, very male opinions, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, why don't we create something that's like women founded and we have more of a diverse perspective, not only a diverse group of guests, but guests from all walks of the sports industry, because I don't think people, I think a lot of people are like, oh, there's players and coaches and maybe some front office staff, but they don't really know that there are so many other dimensions and people that are involved in sport and the things that they do. So that was a huge push for us. And then again, our mission is to really create a platform for these diverse voices and for our own voices. And we hope that, people listen to our content and we are able to spread awareness for women in sport, diversity in sport. And we're really proud of the platform that we have created. And we want to keep pushing the envelope on things. We want to talk about important topics. We want to talk about women in sport. We want to talk about diversity in sport. We want to talk about women's sports and what we can do to get more visibility. We want to talk about the difficult topics that come up. I mean, right now we're seeing, all the things that are happening with Brittany Griner and how we need to get her home. And we've talked about that. We think it is so important to talk about these things and give these super important topics a place and a space to be discussed. So we said, why don't we create that? And that's, Next Woman Up podcast. And also our name comes from Next Man Up mentality, but we have the Next Woman Up mentality. Right. And that is kind of our, tagline, the Next Woman Up mentality, and, what that means to us and what that means to all the people that we bring on and, our fans and our listeners and those things.
Yeah. And I love that you and your co-host are leading this too, right? Because that's how it has to be. Yeah. That's the part about it too. Like a man can't launch that, right? So we can support it. We can be an ally, but I love that because look, the key takeaway from you from that is it's perspective again. We talked about this. You want to be well-rounded. You have to get other perspectives. I've always said this. I said it earlier. If someone had knowledge that could benefit you and or your team and or your workplace, would you care who is giving you the knowledge? Right? I don't. I don't. But it's funny when you put someone in front of you and you don't ask that question first. We all have preconceived notions. That's just part of being human, right? But that's the stuff we got to break. right? That's the state, and you're doing it. You are a trailblazer. I'm going to say it again. And I want to give you a few minutes just to talk about kind of where you want to go with your future, because
Sure.
yeah,
So I'm in the sports media world now, which is like definitely expanding my horizons and making me a lot more well-rounded. You know, having a very intense football background, now I'm really acquiring a lot of skills that I'm, at my age, I'm hoping that I can kind of make myself more well-rounded and really improve my skill set. Um, I would love our podcast to take off. That's obviously a huge goal of
right,
ours. It's going to
right,
take some time. And I want to do a lot of work um, going forward. One of my biggest passions is creating opportunities for women and girls to play football. That is something that is near and dear to my heart. And I was actually lucky enough to be invited to a women's summit back in March with USA Football, where we like tore apart the landscape of women's football. And as a group, with the help of USA Football and hopefully more organizations get involved, how we put it back together and how we improve it. So
right.
that's something that I will be working on, like going forward in my career outside of my, daily job. But those are just things that I hope to have
Right.
on the horizon. And but yeah, really the biggest thing is keeping this idea of diversity in sport and promoting diversity in sport and making that kind of my mission daily and going forward.
Yeah,
I love it.
I'm glad you
I
did
love
that
it.
with US
Thank you.
football.
I have one question.
Yeah,
Carl.
please.
It's a little bit different. How do you feel about athletes, whether boys or girls, wearing helmets before the age of 13, tackle football? I mean,
Sure.
I know this. The NFL's put a ton of money into their flag football program, which I think has now gotten kids a little bit more engaged because parents are going away from that.
Right.
What's your thoughts?
So this is also I'm glad you brought it up. It's also a passion of mine too. How do we grow the game and keep it safe and keep kids playing the game? We already see a huge drop off in participation in high school football, specifically in the Northeast. And this is mainly due to safety. Kids can play other sports and they're safer. I think flag is a good way to start out. I think it is the safest option, especially, we've heard the science behind it. Kids' brains are like super malleable and they're, actually like not fully grown. I know they're not fully grown to get to high school, but at least you're mitigating a lot of the risk if you keep kids playing flag. I know that there were like programs like they called it rookie tackle. That was something USA Football like launched at some point, where it was like a middle ground between flag and tackle, where it's not full 11 on 11, and you're kind of like getting the kids used to tackling, getting the kids used to wearing helmets.
Right.
Which I thought was a great idea because you're learning the fundamentals. I think it's a problem to throw kids right into tackle full speed where they don't have the fundamentals. I think the biggest issue is we need to remind coaches and kids the fundamentals. You even see it in the NFL now, like guys don't know how to wrap up properly, which I think is madness.
No, you still have high school coaches telling kids, put your hat on that, put your hat on that. I'm like,
Right.
What? Like use your, put your, use it with your head.
Right.
I think flag football, I think what it does is it builds an athletic skill set.
Yes.
Right.
It builds, kids are running, jump,
And a love for the game.
Yeah, they love
Yes.
Lee and I growing up. That's what we used to do. We used to play in the backyard, but I think that builds it that way. But go ahead.
So, and what I was going to say, and that's a great point. Like, I do think flag is great. I think more kids are embracing flag. I mean, you see some of these kids playing flag, they're incredible athletes. Like they're doing amazing things out on that field. So I think, and I also think that I know that they're trying to get flag into the Olympics in LA in 2028. If flag is seen, it will also become more of an attractive thing for kids to do. They'll think, oh, wow, it's an Olympic sport. Maybe I should pursue it. And then you can switch over at some point to tackle. But I do think it's not just, the youth. I think, like we were saying, these fundamentals need to be continue to be enforced through high school, up through college, into the pros. And the problem is with this is going to take an overhaul of a generation, because you have coaches that want to stick to what they know and the traditions and what they think is football. But it's like, no, things are changing. And I don't think it's very, very hard to have a culture shift with those type of people.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of the issue we're running into. And you also see there are really cool things happening. Like I will go like talk about Buddy Tevens at Dartmouth. He's the head coach at Dartmouth. He uses like robots kind of. His sell when he does recruiting, he said like, you will never hit another Dartmouth player your whole time here. And he has like significantly reduced concussions and subconcussive hits on his team. And it hasn't affected their play. I mean, Dartmouth has been a solid team the past few years. So I think we need to do more on exploring those things, those options.
I've seen those robots and they are terrifyingly, freakily awesome. If you know, you see an offensive line of robots do their job, it's, a small part of me is like, man, I'd like to see them take on other robots. But look, USA Hockey's done similar things too. And like I said, you're right. It's a generational change. USA Hockey moved checking from Pee Wee up to Bantam. So for those of you who don't know that, it's like 12 and 13 used to be able to hit. You can't do it anymore. And what they've done now is they've used that age level to teach the fundamentals of hitting, but they do not hit in games, which is absolutely the right way to do it, right? You can educate people on how to hit correctly. The other thing I want to tap on, I always say this, JB knows this, outside of my family, hockey's kind of my life, right? It's my profession, it's my life. But man, I love football. I'm a huge football fan. And I remember when I got to work with a football team, just, I guess I said this earlier, the teams within teams within teams, it was almost a haven for me as a team building expert, because, when you look at every play, Carly, every play, everyone's got to do their job. And if one person messes up, it can destroy the entire play.
Right. Football is the ultimate team sport.
I agree. I used to say it was hockey. And I changed that. I tell people, no, it's football. I think it's football. Like when you really think about it, it's just a different sport. And hockey's obviously a big team game too, but no, football is I love it. I love it. I'm a huge fan of it. I'm a huge fan of you and what you've done. Listen, we have about 5 minutes left. I have to ask you this question as part of Grit, right? Look, we all struggle with mental health, mental fitness at times in varying degrees, but it's super important. And that's another stigma that needs to break. So I just want to know, how you practice your mental fitness on a daily basis. And, with all you've accomplished, I'm sure you've had to do things to, there's days you wake up, you gotta keep going, right? The endurance is really what separates people. So how do you practice mental fitness? How important is it to you?
Sure. It is very important to me. I think it took me a couple of years to realize that like I do need to prioritize it in my life. I think, growing up playing sports and being taught, tough love and things like that, I think that is important, but it took me some time to realize that understanding what's going on in your head and your mental health is super key, and giving space to that and giving space to say, hey, today I'm not okay actually, and letting yourself feel that way and acknowledging that, I think is super important. And a lot of times I'm sure a lot of people say, I'm not feeling okay, but I'm going to push through it because, I'm tough and I'll be fine. I think and I'm still obviously working through this and learning this, that you need to give yourself that space to acknowledge that you aren't okay. And what can you do to help yourself? And everyone has their own coping mechanisms. And for me, it's working out. That's like a huge thing for me. I have to get my gym time in, and that's like my space with me to kind of forget about the world and like de-stress. I think that's really important. And then, that attempt to have a work-life balance. I know it's really hard nowadays because we're constantly connected on our phones. We're constantly getting our emails, but say, you know what, if I take an hour for myself, the world isn't going to end. Right. It's okay if I don't answer an email for an hour or so. I need to take this time for myself. And that's something I'm working on as well. But I think that's very, very important. And in today's world, especially where we're constantly connected.
And Carly, just to support you, every study shows that when you do that in a disciplined manner, meaning you don't go for 12 hours, unless you need it, productivity goes way up. We know this. There's so many studies about just quick meditation, or even like you said, just taking some time for yourself. Your productivity will go way up It's actually quite the opposite when you bury it and say, no, I'm fine. I got to keep working. I got to work myself to death. That's part of the human experience that I think we're uncovering, and we're just scratching the surface. But look, Carly, that's all the time. I got to be honest with you. I love what you've done. I love what you're doing. I really mean it when I say you're a trailblazer. I have a daughter, JB's daughter. I look up to people like you as a parent, right? My daughter will see you and know what you've done, and maybe break some ceilings of her own one day. But you just continue to kick ass. That's kind of my party message here. JB, if you want to say anything too.
No, I love it, Carly. I love it. You're going to be running an NFL team. You'll be running an NFL team someday. Mark my words.
Then you can come back on this podcast and we'll say, we had the GM of the team today. No, Carly, thanks so much for being here. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much. This has been really great. And I appreciate, all the compliments and everything, but, it was really, really nice chatting with you guys. And, I hope we can connect soon.
Oh, we will. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, or continuing of a beautiful friendship. But that's going to do it for this episode of Win Championship Trades for Life. Again, we're powered by pivotalmomentsmedia.com. Just head over to the website, check out some more inspirational, entertaining, educational content. We have other channels. We have channels that support women. We have channels that support musical artists, everything in the mental fitness space. We're here for that. So for Carly Helfand and JB Spizo, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for joining us. Keep an eye out for more episodes. And if you like this one, give it a 5-star review on Apple or wherever you listen to it. It really helps us out. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this edition of Win Championship Trades for Life. If you like what you heard, go ahead and hit that subscribe button or that like button wherever you're listening, whether it's a podcast network, a social media network, or our website, pivotalmomentsmedia.com. And remember, Win is part of Grit, a Pivotal Moments Media channel, which is working to break the stigma surrounding mental fitness in sports. Again, visit pivotalmomentsmedia.com for more episodes, content, and education on how we can tackle that challenge together. Keep climbing, and we'll see you on the next